Listen to me now. I want you to understand something that's been eating at me for a long time. There's a reason why real men, strong men, don't share their problems. And it ain't because they don't care. It ain't because they're weak. It's because they've been taught from the very beginning that a man don't cry. A man don't show his pain. A man is supposed to carry that burden all by himself. No questions asked. You see, the world tells us from the moment we start walking that we gotta stand tall, no matter what's breaking us down on the inside. They say a man don't need help. A man don't need no one. So what do? We keep our mouths shut. We bottle it up. We smile through the storm, and we let it eat us alive. Because we don't want to be seen as weak. We don't want to be seen as less than. But let me tell you something. That right there, that's the problem. The strength it takes to hold it all in, that's the thing that's killing us. We hold on so tight to our pride, to that image of who we think we're supposed to be, that we forget we're human. We forget we've got hearts. We forget we've got souls. And when you don't let people in, when you keep it all locked down tight, that's when the walls start closing in. But I'm going to tell you something else. The real strength, the real courage is not in holding it all in. It's in knowing when to let it go. It's in standing in front of somebody and saying, you know what, I need help. I'm not all right. Because the truth is, you don't have to carry it alone. You don't have to be Superman every day. We were never meant to be. We were meant to live, to connect, to share this burden with those who care about us. So, yeah, we don't share our problems. Not because we don't want to, we want to, but because we've been taught to hide the hurt. And that's why it's so important to break that cycle. To show the next generation, to show the young men coming up that it's okay. It's okay to fall. It's okay to cry. It's okay to say, I'm not okay. Because the moment you do, that's when you start to heal. That's when you start to build yourself up stronger than you ever were before. So if you're out there and you're feeling like you're carrying the world on your shoulders, remember this, you're not alone. Don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to say what you need to say. Real men do that too. From an early age, society instills certain expectations in boys that shape how they perceive their role as men. One of the most pervasive expectations is that they must be strong, stoic, and self-sufficient. These ideals of masculinity are reinforced through family, media, schools, and even peer groups, creating an environment where vulnerability is seen as undesirable. Boys are taught, often subtly and sometimes explicitly, that showing emotions like sadness, fear, or even frustration is a sign of weakness. Instead, they're encouraged to man up, to hold it together, to push through adversity without displaying any signs of emotional distress. This social conditioning is powerful. It teaches boys from a young age that a real man doesn't cry, doesn't need help, and doesn't share his problems with others. The message is clear: to be a man is to be independent and unshakable, to bear your burdens alone. This message gets reinforced as they grow older. For many men, the idea of sharing personal struggles or emotional difficulties feels like a direct violation of these expectations. There's an almost primal fear of being judged, ridiculed, or labeled as soft or weak for showing vulnerability. Men internalize these societal messages, which leads to an unfortunate pattern of emotional suppression. This cultural conditioning is so deeply embedded that even when men experience significant emotional pain, they may not recognize it as something to be shared or addressed. Instead, they often believe that the right thing to do is to hide their struggles, push through, and continue to present a facade of control and strength. The fear of appearing less manly can discourage them from seeking help or talking about their feelings, even with close friends or family members. As a result, many men suffer in silence, dealing with everything from mental health challenges to relationship problems to workplace stress, without ever reaching out for support. At its core, the cultural expectation that men must be stoic and self-sufficient is harmful, as it discourages open communication and emotional honesty. It sets up a framework where men feel isolated in their struggles, thinking they are the only ones experiencing these challenges. This belief only perpetuates the idea that they must handle everything on their own, reinforcing the cycle of emotional repression. Breaking free from this mindset is essential for healthier, more balanced emotional well-being, and for a society where men can feel comfortable being vulnerable without fear of judgment. For many men, Pride plays a central role in their decision to hide their problems and avoid sharing their struggles. Pride, in this sense, is not just about arrogance or self-importance. It's about maintaining an image of strength, capability, and control. From a young age, boys are taught to value their independence and to show resilience in the face of hardship. There's a deeply ingrained belief that to be a man is to be self-sufficient, to carry one's burdens without help, and to never reveal any weakness. In fact, for many, the idea of asking for help or admitting vulnerability is seen as a direct threat to their sense of self-worth. This pride becomes a barrier, not only between a man and the world, but also between him and his own emotions. When a man is struggling with mental health issues, relationship problems, financial stress, or career struggles, there's often an overwhelming sense that reaching out for support would somehow diminish his value as a man. The fear of being perceived as weak or inadequate is so powerful that it drives men to internalize their pain and press on without ever acknowledging the weight they are carrying. For them, showing vulnerability feels like a loss of control, and the fear of losing that control can lead to a sense of shame. As this cycle continues, the burden of pride grows heavier. The more a man tries to shoulder his struggles alone, the more isolated and trapped he can feel. But because pride has convinced him that seeking help is a sign of failure, he continues to suffer in silence. This sense of shame becomes a toxic force that exacerbates his problems, leading him to believe that he must always figure it out on his own. The pressure to appear unflappable, unbreakable, and strong is immense, and when it feels impossible to meet these expectations, a man may retreat further into himself, convinced that admitting weakness will lead to rejection or judgment. Pride creates an emotional isolation that is difficult to escape. It prevents men from building the kinds of supportive relationships that can help them heal. It fosters a deep sense of loneliness, because while they are surrounded by others, they are emotionally closed off. Breaking free from this pride and the fear it carries is essential for a healthier approach to emotional well-being. True strength lies not in the refusal to seek help, but in the courage to acknowledge one's struggles and reach out for support when it's needed. The fear of vulnerability is one of the most powerful forces that prevent men from sharing their problems. For many men, being vulnerable, whether emotionally or mentally, is seen as a dangerous territory. It's a fear rooted deeply in societal expectations of what it means to be a man. Vulnerability in many contexts is equated with weakness, and for men who have been raised with the belief that they must always appear strong and unshakable, exposing their vulnerabilities feels like a threat to their identity. The idea that a man should be tough, composed, and in control leads many to repress emotions like sadness, fear, and anxiety, often at the cost of their mental and emotional well-being. When a man opens up about his struggles, there's an underlying fear that he will be judged or misunderstood. The thought of others seeing him as soft or less than is often too much to bear. In a world where men are taught to be warriors, both in the physical and emotional sense, the act of showing pain can feel like an admission of failure. This fear of being judged is not always rational, but is deeply ingrained, often unconsciously. It's the fear of being seen as unmanly or incapable, or of revealing a side that others may not respect or value. As a result, many men bottle up their emotions and suppress their problems, thinking it's safer to deal with them privately rather than expose themselves to potential criticism. This fear of vulnerability also stems from a deeply internalized idea of what it means to be strong. Strength, for many men, is defined by the ability to endure hardship without flinching, to face challenges head-on without asking for help. To admit vulnerability is to risk being seen as less than strong, and that for many men is an unbearable notion. They may fear that by showing vulnerability, they'll be labeled as weak, emotional, or incapable of handling life's pressures. Ironically, this very fear keeps them trapped in a cycle of emotional isolation. The consequences of avoiding vulnerability are far-reaching. When men suppress their feelings, they can experience a range of negative effects: increased stress, anxiety, depression, and even physical health problems. Their relationships can suffer, as the inability to express emotions can create distance between them and their loved ones. Ultimately, the fear of vulnerability not only prevents men from sharing their problems, but it also prevents them from building deeper, more authentic connections with others. The paradox is that it takes greater courage, greater strength to show vulnerability than to hide behind a facade of cynicism. True strength lies not in suppressing emotions, but in embracing them and allowing oneself to be seen as a whole, imperfect human being. For many men, the pressure to be the provider and protector in their families or communities plays a significant role in why they don't share their problems. This sense of responsibility often feels overwhelming and unyielding. From a young age, men are taught that their primary role in society is to support others, whether it's financially, emotionally, or physically. This pressure can become a heavy burden as men internalize the belief that they must be the ones to solve problems and keep things running smoothly, even when their own lives are falling apart. To admit weakness, to show that they are struggling, is seen as a failure in fulfilling this role. It's almost as if their value is directly tied to their ability to provide and protect, leaving little room for personal vulnerability. The fear of not living up to these expectations can make sharing their problems feel impossible. If a man opens up about financial difficulties, relationship problems, or emotional struggles, he may fear that he'll be seen as incapable or inadequate. He might worry that his loved ones will no longer look to him for support, or that he'll lose the respect and trust he's worked so hard to build. The pressure to maintain a facade of competence and control is exhausting, but it feels necessary. If he's not the one who has everything figured out, who is? If he's struggling, what does that say about his ability to provide or protect those he loves? This sense of responsibility is often tied to traditional ideas of masculinity, where men are expected to shoulder the weight of the world without ever asking for help. These expectations are often reinforced by family, society, and media portrayals of men as strong, reliable figures who never falter. The idea that a man should always be the one who fixes things and keeps everything in order leaves little room for him to admit he needs help or is struggling emotionally. It creates a barrier, not only between him and the people around him, but also between him and his own well-being. Over time, this sense of duty can lead to burnout, depression, and emotional isolation. The more a man tries to fulfill his role without acknowledging his own needs or struggles, the more he distances himself from those who care about him. Ironically, this isolation often prevents him from receiving the support he most needs. Instead of leaning on others, he continues to carry the weight alone, which can have serious long-term consequences for both his mental and physical health. To truly fulfill the role of provider and protector, a man must first recognize that he too needs support, that asking for help is not a sign of failure, but a step toward maintaining his ability to continue fulfilling his responsibilities. The emotional isolation that often results from a man's reluctance to share his problems can be one of the most damaging aspects of this mindset. When a man feels he must carry his burdens alone without the support or understanding of others, he becomes trapped in a cycle of loneliness. This isolation is not always visible to the outside world. He may continue to appear strong, composed, and capable, but internally, he can feel disconnected, alienated, and unsupported. Emotional isolation is a subtle but powerful force, and it's something that many men experience without even fully recognizing it. One of the reasons this isolation is so pervasive is because men are taught to keep their emotions in check. From an early age, boys learn that sharing their feelings or asking for help is a sign of weakness. As they grow older, this belief becomes ingrained, and they internalize the idea that their struggles are something they must face alone. They might not reach out to friends, family, or even partners because they fear being judged or misunderstood. The result is a kind of emotional withdrawal where they shut themselves off from others in order to preserve their sense of control and pride. The more a man withholds his emotions, the more isolated he becomes. He might not share his worries with friends because he doesn't want to appear weak, but in doing so, he loses the opportunity for connection, empathy, and support. Over time, this isolation can deepen, leading to feelings of loneliness and even depression. The very act of trying to protect his image can create an emotional distance between him and the people he cares about. He might stop communicating openly with his partner, avoid sharing his struggles with close friends, or withdraw from social situations altogether. This emotional isolation also makes it harder for men to form authentic relationships. If they're not being open about their struggles or vulnerabilities, they're not allowing others to truly know them. And without that level of honesty and connection, relationships can remain surface level, preventing the kind of deep, supportive bonds that are essential for emotional well-being. Ironically, this lack of communication can cause more harm than good, because while a man might think he's protecting his image, he's actually pushing away the people who care about him the most. The longer this emotional isolation persists, the more difficult it becomes to break the cycle. But it's important to recognize that sharing one's struggles with trusted individuals, whether friends, family, or professionals, is not a sign of weakness, but a step toward building stronger, more genuine relationships. Real emotional connection is built on vulnerability, and by reaching out for support, men can not only lighten their emotional load, but also deepen their connections with others. Reaching out isn't about being saved, it's about being seen and understood, and ultimately, it's about healing and growth. The need for change in how men approach their emotional well-being is critical, not only for their own health, but for the well-being of their relationships and communities. The traditional notion that a man must silently endure hardship, repress emotions, and carry burdens alone is increasingly being recognized as harmful and outdated. As society continues to evolve, it's becoming more evident that real strength lies not in the ability to hide struggles, but in the ability to confront them, to seek help, and to be vulnerable with others. Breaking the cycle of emotional repression and isolation is not just an individual need, it's a cultural imperative. The first step toward change is acknowledging that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a form of courage. For many men, the idea of admitting they need help or sharing their problems with others has been so deeply ingrained as a failure that it becomes a barrier to their emotional growth. However, the truth is that no one can handle everything alone. Everyone, regardless of gender, faces difficulties that are too great to shoulder without support. When men begin to recognize that vulnerability is an essential part of being human, it opens the door to healthier ways of coping with stress, anxiety, and emotional pain. It becomes a sign of emotional intelligence, not weakness. The next critical step is creating environments where men feel safe to share their feelings. This involves challenging the societal norms that often discourage emotional openness. Whether it's in families, friendships, workplaces, or broader communities, men need to be surrounded by people who not only accept but encourage emotional honesty. They need to feel that expressing their struggles won't lead to judgment, ridicule, or loss of respect. Instead, they need to know that being open about difficulties can lead to empathy, connection, and genuine support. This shift can start small through conversations with trusted friends or family members, but over time, it can help dismantle the stigmas around emotional expression and create a culture of shared humanity. Men need to learn to prioritize their mental health just as they do their physical health. This means seeking help when needed, whether through therapy, support groups, or simply talking to someone they trust. Just as a man would see a doctor for a physical ailment, he must recognize the importance of addressing emotional and psychological health with the same level of seriousness. Taking care of oneself, both mentally and emotionally, is not selfish, it's necessary for being able to show up fully for others. The change we need is a collective one. By challenging outdated ideals of masculinity and encouraging men to open up about their struggles, we can create a world where emotional well-being is valued, where vulnerability is seen as a strength, and where men no longer feel the need to bear their burdens alone. This shift can lead to stronger, more authentic relationships and healthier communities, benefiting everyone. In the end, the most important thing to remember is that true strength lies not in isolation, but in connection. Men don't have to carry their burdens alone, and opening up doesn't make them any less strong. It makes them more human, more real. By challenging the outdated norms and embracing vulnerability, we can create a society where men feel safe to share their struggles, seek help when needed, and support one another through life's challenges. This isn't just about individual healing, but about breaking down barriers to form deeper, more meaningful connections. It's about creating a future where emotional well-being is prioritized and where asking for help is seen as an act of courage, not weakness. Thank you for taking the time to reflect on this issue. Let's keep the conversation going so we can all grow stronger together mentally, emotionally, and as a community. Thank you.